Good morning and welcome to Saturday, January 21st, 2023. This is Just Parlays with Chris King. Of course, I'm the host, Chris King. Hopefully you had a good week and you're ready for the weekend. A lot of sports going on today. Of course, we've got the NFL divisional playoffs, 2 games today, 2 tomorrow as we move on through the playoffs. The AFC Championship game and the NFC Championship game scheduled for next week. Light day in college basketball if you're a fan of that. Only 144 games on the schedule, so it makes for a lot of options out there to choose from. A lot of big games, a lot of smaller conference games too that are always entertaining. Sometimes you get a better line on those than you do on the big conferences because nobody can keep track of every team as much as we would like to. Big night on the ice too. After yesterday's whopping 2 games, there's 14 today, and then there are, I believe, 7 games in the association as well. So options all over the place as far as what you choose to wager on. Just looking through the college schedule real quick, you see, let's see, there's 1, 2. Not as many games between ranked teams as we've seen in recent weeks. You've got TCU taking on Kansas at Allen Fieldhouse. That game should be a good one. You've also got UCLA and Arizona, that game coming to you from the McHale Center. That should be another marquee matchup for sure. Other ranked teams in action in games that might be interesting. Iowa State taking on Oklahoma State. You've got Charleston against Northeastern at noon. Charleston's been a very good team that nobody talked about early in the season, and they're sitting at number 18 in the country with a 20-1 record. Their one loss came back in the second game of the season when they lost at Chapel Hill to North Carolina. Since then, 19 consecutive wins on the books for the Cougars as they head to face Northeastern, a team that's usually pretty good in the CAA, but middle of the road so far this season. 8-10 overall, 4-3 in the conference. Let's see, who else do we have that's entertaining to look at today? Virginia taking on Wake Forest if you want to go to sleep, because everybody knows Virginia relies on their defense, not a great offensive team by any stretch of the imagination. Texas Tech still trying to right the ship as they've been struggling of late. They come into this one now with 6 straight losses as they travel to Manhattan to take on Kansas State. The Wildcats, of course, beat Kansas earlier in the week. So that was a big win for them. Can they keep that momentum going, or will they end up falling flat? We'll have to see about that one. Tennessee goes to LSU. Marquette at Seton Hall. Number 21 Baylor at Oklahoma. Virginia Tech takes on number 19 Clemson at Little John Coliseum. You've got Alabama going to Columbia to take on Missouri. Number 7 Texas plays West Virginia. And just scrolling down here, of course, the Wisconsin-Northwestern game was postponed. Northwestern dealing with, I believe it's a COVID outbreak that has shortened their team to the fact where I think they don't even have 6 guys. Which is too bad because Northwestern's played some pretty good basketball. They're 12-5 on the year, 3-3 in the conference. They've had their last 2 games postponed. They're supposed to face Iowa on Wednesday, and that game was pushed back. Then they're not playing tonight. Their next game is supposed to be Tuesday against Nebraska. So hopefully the Wildcats can get back playing basketball as they try to make a rare NCAA tournament appearance, something that hasn't happened much in their history. Looking at the marquee game in college basketball last night, obviously it was a light schedule. A lot of mid-major teams on the floor. You saw VCU take down Richmond 74-62. And then in overtime out in the pit, it was in Albuquerque, I should say. It was New Mexico running their record to 18-2 on the year as they beat Boise State 81-79 in overtime. Morris Udeze, the winning bucket, 2 seconds left in overtime after New Mexico blew a 5-point lead in the extra session. New Mexico 18-2, 5-2 in the conference. Boise State 15-5 overall, 5-2 in the Mountain West. Part of a three-way tie for second in the conference behind who else but San Diego State, who has, been a force in that conference for years now. Brian Dutcher's team 14-4 overall, 5-1 in the Mountain West heading into today. We saw Iona struggle to beat Manhattan in overtime. Not sure what's going on with Rick Pitino's team. They don't cover a lot of games. They're 13-6. They're 6-2 in the MAC, but still, you've looked and they got blown out by Quinnipiac on the road. They lost to Ryder at home. They scuffled against Fairfield last week. They scuffled against Manhattan today. It's hard to figure out what's going on with them. They're 6-2 in the MAC. They're one game behind Siena, who is 7-1. And they'll meet next Friday night in the Gales' next game in Albany. So that'll be a good matchup in a mid-major that, people will probably be talking about. It'll probably be one of the big games on the slate for next Friday's slate. Just looking ahead, like we said, we've got the NFL playoffs. We've got the Chiefs and the Jaguars. At Arrowhead, we've got the Giants and the Eagles at the Link. It'll be an interesting day on the gridiron, to say the least. You look at these teams, they both are rematches of regular season meetings. Of course, Kansas City beat Jacksonville 27-17 in the first meeting at Arrowhead earlier this season, before Jacksonville all of a sudden realized, hey, we should win football games. And the Eagles and the Giants, of course, division rivals. The Eagles took both meetings, but they looked uninspired and unimpressive in their win in Week 18 when they beat the Giants' backups by a score of 22-16. Not really what you expected when you're dealing with trying to clinch home field advantage, trying to clinch the NFC East, and so on. And you have to wonder, is Jalen Hurts any healthier than he was 2 weeks ago? Because he didn't look great in that game. And I said, you struggled to beat a team that played Davis Webb at quarterback and had no starters really on the field for the majority of that game. And you still couldn't cover the line. It'll be interesting. Good to see you, Joaquin. Hopefully things are good with you. Hopefully there's no snow or anything like that. Speaking of the weather, we'll just take a quick look and see if the weather will affect any of the games this weekend. Let's see. What are we looking at Arrowhead Stadium? By the way, in case you're wondering, of course, there's the always popular fact that Trevor Lawrence, 37-0, playing on Saturdays. I know a lot of people are interested in seeing if he can keep that string going. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot to deal with in Kansas City. There might be some snow in the afternoon. I don't think it's going to be much of a factor. It looks like a dusting at best. Temperatures in the mid-30s. Looking like, let's see, what do we have for wind? Not much in the way of wind either, 4 or 5 miles an hour. So pretty favorable conditions in Kansas City for tonight's matchup. In Philadelphia, well, it's Philadelphia. It doesn't matter if the weather's good or not. you're going to have a bunch of rowdy fans out there. And the weather, pretty good for late January, 38 degrees, winds from the northwest about 4 miles an hour. So not much in the way of wind or anything to be a factor there. So it should be good for Daniel Jones and Jalen Hurts as both teams try to advance to the conference title game. For tomorrow's games, if we look at the 49ers and the Cowboys, let's take a look here. Tomorrow evening, clear skies in San Francisco. Winds about 13 to 15 miles an hour. Temperatures in the mid-50s. So it looks like things will be good there as well. What fun is that once you're playing football in January and there's weather's not a factor? In Orchard Park, you do have some snow in the forecast tomorrow. Doesn't look like it'll be a ton, but you never know because with the lake effect, anything can happen. But right now they're expecting temperatures around just above the freezing mark at kickoff. Not much in the way of wind again, which is very strange because if you've been in Highmark Stadium in January or December and January, you know you usually get those swirling winds 20 to 25 miles an hour. But not looking like to be a factor this week. It looks like it'll be only about 4 or 5 miles an hour. Like I said, the funny thing with lake effect is you never know. It could blow in out of nowhere, and it won't be forecasted until it hits. We've seen it a lot. So always watch the weather, but a lot of good stuff today. A lot of games last night that were some were interesting. I mean, we watched the Memphis, blow lead and then fail to tie the game because we talk all the time about hitting free throws, and down the stretch, Memphis didn't hit them. And that's why they ended up losing to the Lakers. That and they kept committing stupid fouls. Denver blew out Indiana. Dallas beat Miami rather comfortably, winning by 25. We saw Golden State beat Cleveland on the road in the second game of a back-to-back, which was surprising, especially when you look and you saw they started a starting five of Jonathan Kuminga, Kevin Looney, Dante DiVincenzo, Ty Jerome, and Jordan Poole. There was no Curry. There was no Draymond Green. There was no Klay Thompson. On the other side, you didn't see Donovan Mitchell. And you look at the Warriors, despite not having any of those guys in their lineup, they hit 23 of 43 from three-point range. You can't let a team shoot better than 53% from beyond the arc without any of their stars and expect to win a ball game. But that's where we were yesterday. Atlanta won their fourth in a row. They beat the Knicks. Their fifth in a row. I forgot about that. They scored 139 points, shot 56% from the field, only turned the ball over 7 times. And they needed to shoot hot because they let the Knicks shoot 59%. Where has defense gone in the NBA? This is back to the day. It looks like when you look at the scores, it's like going back to the mid-'80s when everybody was scoring 120 points a game, it seemed, on a night-in, night-out basis. I mean, come on. The only team to not crack 100 points yesterday was Miami. Everybody else in the league scored at least 106. And with the Heat, it's not a big surprise. They were, I think, second worst in scoring offense in the league going into last night's game. Didn't get any better. Obviously, they only hung 90 points. And you talk about a surprising team. Look who leads the Pacific Division. The Sacramento Kings. Now, if you would have said that you thought the Sacramento Kings were going to win or lead the Pacific Division in late January, and have the third best record in the West, nobody would believe you. But the Kings lead the league in points per game. They average 119.8 points a contest. They've got a good young nucleus there. You got with Sabonis and Fox and Herter, Keegan Murray. Those guys all under 26 or under. They play good basketball offensively. They're not great defensively, but when you're piling up that many points, it doesn't matter. And so far, it hasn't. They've got a 4-game lead over the Clippers and the inconsistent Suns. Talk about a team that nobody can figure out what the hell their problem is. And, they're one of the pleasant surprises of the season so far. They beat Oklahoma City last night. They've won 6 straight. They're just rolling right along. They play Philadelphia tonight, so they'll be in the second game of a back-to-back situation against the 76ers. In what should be a pretty marquee matchup and one that stands out on a slate that doesn't necessarily have a ton of big games. You got 2 division games in the Southeast. You've got Orlando taking on Washington, and you've got Charlotte taking on Atlanta. You've got Houston playing Minnesota. You've got Indiana playing Phoenix. So the 3 best games on the slate, in no particular order, are Boston, Toronto. That's at 5 o'clock Eastern. You've got Milwaukee and Cleveland at 7:30 Eastern. Cleveland obviously playing the second game of a back-to-back since we said they lost to Golden State. And you've got Philadelphia, Sacramento. So those are probably the best games in the NBA. You look at the NHL, like I said, pretty much everybody's playing in the NHL with 14 games on the slate. You're looking at ton of good games there because you look. I mean, nobody really cares about Anaheim and Buffalo, but you got Tampa Bay, Calgary. You've got let's see, you got the ever popular rivalry game, Toronto, Montreal. You've got Winnipeg taking on Ottawa, Carolina and the Islanders. You got the Kings and the Predators. Colorado, who comes off a win last night over Vancouver, they'll go to Seattle to take on the Kraken. You got the Oilers taking on the same Canucks that we just talked about losing last night. And you got Washington and Vegas. There's some duds in there. Nobody cares about San Jose and Columbus, 2 teams that are going nowhere. Or Chicago, St. Louis, or Arizona's going to Dallas. That should be a good win for the Stars, provided they play quality hockey, which they usually do. Let's see here. Winnipeg, Ottawa, like I said. Philadelphia goes to Detroit. Minnesota, Florida. If you were expecting a game of veteran goaltenders in that one, you'll be sadly disappointed. It's not Marc-Andre Fleury, and it's not Sergei Bobrovsky. It's Philippe Gustafsson taking on Alex Lyon, who came out in relief against Montreal on Thursday night when Bobrovsky was injured 2 minutes into the game. So he's expected to get the start. I'm not sure what the status on Bobrovsky is. They didn't have anything about him yesterday other than they called up another goaltender from the minors. Florida called up, Spencer Knight's on a conditioning assignment down in Charlotte in the AHL. Mac Guzda is coming up to take his spot. And with Bobrovsky banged up, they figure Leon will start. Guzda will be the backup in what should be a interesting matchup of goaltenders that nobody's really heard of. Bronco talking about he's got Xavier, Charleston, Arkansas, Penn State, St. Louis, Pitt, Tulane, Gonzaga, and the Chiefs. I'll tell you what, Gonzaga, I don't know what their problem is this year either, because you've seen them play some inconsistent basketball. They lost to Loyola Marymount the other day, snapping their home winning streak at, I want to say it was something like 67 games. Very disappointing performance. They struggled against BYU last week on the road, too. They came back home and bombed Portland. But they're playing a Pacific team that's, well, inconsistent. You look at Pacific, they opened the season with a loss to Stanford. They won 2 straight. Then they lost 4 in a row, all at home. Then they won 1. Then they lost 2. Then they won 1. Then they lost to Cal State East Bay. Everybody knows they're a basketball power. Then they won 3 in a row. They lost to BYU. They won 3 in a row, and they've dropped their last 2. They lost to Santa Clara, and then were routed by San Francisco. So they're 10-11, 3-3 in the West Coast Conference. But still, Gonzaga, a very good basketball team. You're probably right. I don't see Gonzaga losing. I didn't look to see what the line was on that game. You're probably safer going with the money line. God knows that when you see Gonzaga play, you see a lot of ugly numbers. Normally, I'll just pull it up to see how bad it actually was. I know when I was looking through and going through all the games, Gonzaga is favored by 17.5. It's actually gone up. They opened at 15.5. So nobody really having a ton of faith in the Tigers. In Stockton, I don't necessarily blame them. Will the Bills cover? Everybody wants to talk about how Cincinnati's going to win that game and romp and everything else. Everybody wants to talk about how bad Buffalo played last week because, they only beat Miami by 3 points. But if you look, and I'm not going to compare the Bengals offense to the Dolphins offense, but if you look, Miami got the majority of their points from drives that started off of turnovers or their one big punt return. They didn't have any sustained drives to speak of other than the one. We know that, of course, the regular season game was affected by the Hamlin incident, and like it or not, the way the league dealt with it left a bad taste in the mouths of some fans, and that's why this game's at Orchard Park. But I think it's going to be a good game. Will they cover? It depends on, turnovers, because obviously when you turn the ball over, you let a team hang around because they get extra possessions. Will it happen tomorrow? Anything's possible. I think they can cover. I like the line better when it was at 4 instead of 5.5 or 6. But I think it'll be either way. It's going to be a high-scoring game. I think you're not going to see a defensive struggle there. Well, and the thing, Bronco, with the Chiefs is they're still allergic to defense. And if they play Buffalo beat them in Arrowhead earlier this year. That's why that game would be in Atlanta, which I heard was a giant fiasco as far as Ticketmaster went, which is no surprise. But if they play Buffalo, they'll play them in Atlanta. Mahomes is 0-3 against Burrow. He's lost 2 of his last 3 to Allen. So there's that too. Joaquin says 16 were the Jags, the Giants, the 76ers, the Blue Jackets going over, the Avalanche on the money line, and Portland. Yeah, I would imagine it'll pay a lot if you're going with the money line. I don't know if Joaquin's taking the points in both of those playoff games or not, because both are rather heavy underdogs with the points, as everybody knows. Jacksonville currently getting 9, and most books the Giants getting 7.5. Philadelphia, I don't know, because Philadelphia, you never know what you're going to get with them. They play well one night, the next night they're terrible. They scuffle to get by teams that they should beat rather easily. Okay, Joaquin's taking the points. Yep. Blue Jackets over. They're playing. Oh, that's right. They're playing San Jose in the battle of teams that can't play gold or can't find a goaltender. Just taking a quick look at that goaltending situation. When you look at that, let's see. Doesn't take long to get to the bottom. San Jose 29th in the league in goals against at 3.7. Columbus is 30th, 3.89 goals a game. You'd think that this one would be a high-scoring affair, to say the least. Of course, you never know, because every once in a while these teams will throw in one of those duds where the game ends up 2-1, and you're like, what the hell was that? But, I mean, for the most part, with the points, I mean, you're in a favorable position because, like we said, the Eagles beat the Giants scrubs by 6 when they had home field advantage and everything at stake a couple weeks ago. I don't know if Jalen Hurts is anywhere near 100%. And let's face it, that impacts the Eagles' offense. And that's something that is going to have to be watched for. I don't think Sirianni would take him out and go with Minshew by any stretch of the imagination. But you have to wonder, is a 60 or 70% Hurts good enough to get you forward? And that's something that we're going to have to watch and see. We'll see how well he looks, because he wasn't great in that Week 18 game. He's going to take a look at what his numbers were real quick. Let's see. He was 20 of 35 for 229 yards and an interception. He ran the ball 9 times for just 13 yards. Those aren't the kind of numbers that you were used to seeing out of him before he got injured. He got sacked 3 times. His passer rating was 65.1. When you lose the passer rating battle to Davis Webb on a team that had no receiver targets to speak of, because you look and Matt Breida caught 7 balls for 12 yards. You had a Kenny Golladay sighting. He caught 2 passes. But, I mean, they basically had a bunch of nobodies in there. Lawrence Cager caught 8 passes. Those aren't marquee names in a flag football league, much less in the NFL. And he still put up a passer rating of 75.8 against Hurts' 65.1. I'm not sold on the Eagles right now. When Hurts was healthy, they were dominant. With Hurts banged up, I don't know what to make of them. I would take the points. Because I think I agree with Joaquin. I think Philadelphia will win that game, but I don't think they're going to blow the Giants out of the water. You know, we saw Daniel Jones put together another solid game last week against the Vikings on the road, and he's familiar with playing against the Eagles and playing in Lincoln Financial Field. Should be a good game all around. And with that, we can move on to the fun part of the show in just a moment, which is, of course, is why you're here. Of course, make sure that you like and subscribe and hit the bell, all that good stuff, so you'll get notified when we're here, which is, as you know, 9 o'clock on Saturday mornings. But that way, you know, you can set a reminder and then set your alarm clock and everything else. May have some donuts. And of course, if you're looking for premium plays, use the promo code KJ4YCKP60. You can get 60% off any picks or packages this week. So that's KJ4YCKP60 for 60% off You can use them on my picks. You can use them on Mason's picks or Steen's or David's. And there's so many people, it's hard to keep track of all the names now. But, go in there, save yourself some money, and then win yourself some money. And it all pays out, all works out in the end. So we will start with 3 for the money. And I'm going to go with the aforementioned Celtics over the Raptors. Boston came back to beat Golden State in overtime the other night. The Raptors, if anybody can figure out what their problem is, let me know because, they're still in the basement of the Atlantic. They blew a lead down the stretch against Minnesota the other night. Lost 128-126. They've lost 2 straight. They lost to the Bucks. They've lost 3 of 4. They lost to Atlanta. They escaped the Knicks in overtime at Madison Square Garden earlier in the week. But they're 6 games below 500. They're just not. They're not playing consistent basketball, and that's a big problem. I know that you get up for these games when you play a team like Boston, but the Celtics are a deep team. They've won 8 straight. We saw them dig deep to come back to beat Golden State in that game. Celtics, they've got a 4.5 game lead in the Eastern Conference for the best record. And Toronto sits a game and a half out of the play-in tournament as it stands right now. Raptors just 14-11 at home. Meanwhile, Boston 16-7 on the road, and they've won all 5 of their divisional games this season. I only have to give 2 points against a team that is inconsistent. I mean, sign me up because let's face it, could Toronto win? Sure. Will they? Probably not. And I see the lines actually trimmed down even further now. Boston is now favored by 1. Because I did these last night. Tatum's not going to play, but they still got Brown, and they have Smart, and they have Horford. And, you can insert any other group of names here. Now, Take No Cover says that Tatum's not going to play, but you never know how accurate that might be. The Hurricanes over the Islanders. I went against Carolina the other night against Minnesota, and Minnesota got dusted. Both teams very good in their own end. Carolina's 5th in goals against at 264. The Islanders are 8th. 8th at 272 per game. But I just watched the Islanders lose to the Sabres the other day. Carolina, like I said, they dismantled Minnesota. I just like the way the Hurricanes are playing. Of course, they won't have Max Pacioretty, who had 3 goals in 5 games, but tore his Achilles for the second time in less than a year because he tore it last season and then tore it again the other night in that win over Minnesota. But I like the Hurricanes a little better than I like the Islanders right now. Like I said, the Islanders lost to Buffalo the other night in a game that they had pretty much dominated. But you look lately, and the Islanders are trending quickly in the wrong direction. In their last 8 games, they have gone a dismal, 1, 4, and 3. And since New Year's Day, they are 2, 5, and 3, which adds up to basically 2 and 8 if you want to get right down to it. Sure, they got points in 5 games, but a shootout loss and a pair of OT losses doesn't really help you gain any ground in the standings. And they haven't been scoring. You look in this 10-game stretch since New Year's Day, the Islanders have scored 1 goal. 5 times. They've scored more than 2 twice. They had 3 against the Capitals in an overtime loss last Monday where they gave up. They were up 3-0 and lost, and they scored 6 against Vancouver back on January 3rd. That's it. lose 4-1. They beat Vancouver. Then they lost to Edmonton 4-2. They lost to Calgary 4-1. They lost to Dallas 2-1 in a shootout. They lost to Minnesota 3-1. They beat the Canadiens 2-1. Then they lost to Washington 4-3. They lost to Boston 4-1. They lost to Buffalo 3-2. If you're not scoring goals, and I know this isn't rocket science, but if you're not scoring goals, you aren't going to win in the National Hockey League. I don't care how good your goal hitting is. And that's where they are right now. They are failing to put the puck in the net, and it's going to cost them again. And then Isaiah Hodgins over 41.5 receiving yards for the Giants. You figure that regardless of how this game goes, whether it's close, whether it's not, the Giants are going to have to move the ball through the air. And, Hodgins, he stepped up after getting picked up on waivers. Because Buffalo didn't have an open roster spot. They were trying to put him back on the practice squad, and the Giants grabbed him. But you look at his numbers since he went to the Giants. He's caught 30 some balls. He had 8 catches last week against the Vikings for 105 yards and a touchdown. He's now caught a touchdown in 3 straight games, 5 of his last 6. In that stretch, he had 5 catches for 44 yards and a score against Washington, 4 for 38 and a score against Philadelphia in Week 14, 4 for 37 against Washington the second time. In the regular season meeting with Minnesota, 8 catches, 89 yards and a touchdown, 4 for 42 and a score against the Colts in the game where the Giants clinched a playoff spot. He didn't play in Week 18 against Philadelphia. And like I said, 8 for 105 last week against Minnesota. He's basically their number 1 receiver right now. And some of that you can say, well, that just tells you how bad the Giants' receiving core is. But talk about a guy that's taking advantage of opportunity, and that's what he's done. He's got good size, 6'4", 210. Daniel Jones has got a pretty good rapport with him. I mean, when you catch 8 balls on 9 targets, that's pretty good. And I think he can make a dent here. Morning, John. Tennessee minus 11.5 against LSU. Which Tennessee are we going to see? Are we going to see the Tennessee team that put up a dud against Kentucky, or are we going to see the Tennessee team that blew out South Carolina a couple weeks ago by 43 points and beat Mississippi State by 34 points? I think the Kentucky loss was a wake-up call for Tennessee. You're looking at an LSU team. Matt McMahon, he had a nice start after coming down from Murray State. He was 12-1, but then reality set in. You look at, and they've lost 5 straight games. They lost to Kentucky at Rupp Arena. They lost in College Station, Texas A&M. They lost at home to Florida by double digits. They were obliterated by Alabama. And I know that was a game. I think that was a game you asked about, that we talked about last week when you asked about it, Danny, was the Alabama game. And then they were just dusted at home again by Auburn, 67-49. Now, Auburn, is a good defensive team. And Tennessee is even better defensively than Auburn. You look, Auburn 11th in adjusted defensive efficiency, 5th in effective field goal percentage defense at 42.6. Tennessee's first in adjusted defensive efficiency. They're first in effective field goal percentage defense at 38.2. They're 10th in turnover percentage forced at nearly 25%. They're first in 3-point defense. They're 5th in 2-point defense. They're 22nd in block percentage. They're 7th in steal percentage. If you struggle to score 49 points against Auburn, good luck against Tennessee. I will take Tennessee, and I will also take the under. I don't see this one getting, unless Tennessee hangs, 80 or 85 points. I don't know if you're going to get to 130. You look at the last couple of games for Tennessee, 119 in the Kentucky game, 129 in the Mississippi State game. 130.5 is kind of low. So that one could waffle either way because you could get a couple of late buckets. But Tennessee should win this one easily when you look at how LSU is reeling. Like I said, last 4 losses all by double digits. Lost by 13, 11, 40, and then 18. This LSU team just not as good as they looked early on. And I think that Tennessee will take care of business there rather soundly. Thanks, John. I hope to be here more often in the future too. It all comes down to, views and everything else. Same as everything goes in the business. The more people that watch and stuff, the easier it is to justify the time and effort involved for everybody. Because obviously, it's not, you just don't just show up and talk about stuff. You actually have to do research, and that's time consuming and everything else. I enjoy it, and I know that I'm glad you guys enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it anyway. But I hope to be back more regularly too. That's the plan. Yeah, like you said, Bronco, LSU is struggling. They're just not the same team that they looked like early on. Even if you look at their numbers beforehand, they scored 60 against Arkansas in a win right after Christmas. They scored 67 against North Carolina Central in mid-December. They scored 63 against UT Arlington at the beginning of December. The good days of scoring 70-plus points a game, they did that 5 times in their first 7 games. And they've only hit 70 points, 3 or 4 times since the end of November. Yeah, 4 times since the end of November, or since the start of December and into January, have you seen LSU crack 70 points? And one of those was a 2-point win over Wake Forest, then an 8-point win over Winthrop. I got news for you. If you're struggling to beat teams like Winthrop and East Tennessee State and North Carolina Central on your own floor, you've got problems when then you have to go and deal with the Texas A&Ms and the Alabamas and the Tennessees and the Auburns, and even teams like Georgia. Georgia has played very good basketball for Mike Waite this season, but LSU's got some problems, and they have to figure some things out. Otherwise, it's just going to keep going downhill. Takes us to 4 for the show. I waffled on this one for a little bit, but I think Devonta Smith is going to be a big factor for the Eagles if they're going to win this game convincingly. You look at his numbers. Everybody wants to talk about A.J. Brown, and I get it. Brown's a big play guy. But Smith gives you volume. He caught 95 balls in the regular season for almost 1,200 yards. Down the stretch, he had 5 catches against the Titans, 5 catches against the Giants in the first meeting, 5 catches against the Bears, 8 against the Cowboys, 9 against the Saints, and in that game at the end of the season against the Giants, 7 grabs on 8 targets for 67 yards. You're not going to see them, dial up, 40 and 50-yard passes down the field to Brown on every play. You've got to be able to move the chains. And Smith is more the Smith and I guess to a point you could say Goddard are the guys that move the sticks. You're not necessarily looking to those guys to put up huge numbers as far as, yards per catch or anything. But I think Smith, he'll be involved early. He'll be involved often because he's more of a safety valve. Brown is your over-the-top kind of guy, because he caught 88 balls for almost 1,500 yards. But if you're looking for a guy that's going to keep the chains moving, that's Smith. And I think that he'll catch 6 or 7 balls in this game because he's so valid. Yeah, Goddard over receptions is a good bet too. I didn't take a look this morning to see what the number was. But let's face it, Goddard is a valuable safety valve. The Eagles have long used tight ends for that. And, he's a good one. I mean, they've struggled when he was banged up earlier in the season. Just taking a quick look here to see what it is. Goddard. Receptions made. Over 4.5 at minus 120. Okay. Yeah, so that's probably a safe bet too. I mean, he's a valuable force in the middle of the field. He can stretch out or stretch the seam and move the sticks there as well. Vegas over Washington. Washington doesn't play well on their own end. They're not a great road team. Just taking a quick look here at the standings. Washington not sixth. They're fourth in the Metropolitan. They're trying to get by. They're 12-9-3 on the road, but they're not great defensively. Vegas is trying to bounce back after dropping 3 in a row. They're in the middle of a crowded Pacific Division where Seattle and Vegas have 58 points. The Kings have 56. The Oilers have 55. Flames have 51. I can't trust Washington's goaltending. I think that Vegas is a better team in both ends of the ice, and I think they'll get the win at home. Yeah, the Eagles do start fast. I will say that. What's the first quarter number on that? Let me take a look. Quarters. Let's see. Eagles minus 2.5. Yeah, they could be up 7-3 or something like that at the end of the quarter, or 7-0. So I mean, if you look at 7-3, you could probably look at the over 9.5 for the first quarter. And I think the Eagles, yeah, I could see them playing the first quarter. I don't necessarily look at a lot of quarter numbers just because, then you condense your option down, but I know a lot of people do like those numbers. The Eagles this season, just taking a quick look at the stats in the first quarter this year. Let me see. See if I can pull that up. Let's see. Just going down here through the list. Let's see. It's always fun trying to find half these stats. But either way, I'm not pulling up the numbers right off the top of my head where I'm looking at them. But I think that the Eagles should be up after the first quarter. They're a quality football team, and they've been here before. The Giants got here for the first time in a few years. Yeah, that's a good call too, Daniel Jones over 214.5, especially if you think the Eagles win because he'll have to move the ball through the air. to try and keep his team in it. I also think he's going to run the ball. I think he's going to run the ball a lot against them. We saw it was effective against Minnesota last week. I don't see why Brian Daboll would change the script in this one if he wants to try to keep the game close. The Wiz over the Magic. We talked about Orlando playing the second game of a back-to-back tonight. They beat New Orleans last night. In the second game of back-to-backs this year, they're 1-7. They're not a great road team. And that's probably being generous. They're 6-16 as the visiting team this year. Washington, 2 games out of the final spot in the play-in tournament. I think that they should take care of business. I don't trust Orlando. And John brings up a valid point, too. That entire game with the Eagles changes if Hurts struggles because of his collarbone. And that's a totally valid point and something that you got to watch for because, like I said earlier, I don't think Sirianni will go to Minshew unless he has no choice. But Hurts didn't look great in the game against the Giants' backups. Now, he's had 2 weeks to rest, but that's also 2 weeks to be rusty, too, because he's played just one meaningful game in over a month. Will that be a factor? We'll have to see. But definitely something to watch for. UNLV over Fresno State. If you're looking for a bad basketball team on the offensive end of the floor, beat the Fresno State Bulldogs. They scored 48 points in a game against Air Force. They play at a slow tempo. They don't shoot the ball well. They turn it over. They don't rebound well. They can't shoot from 3. Their high point total this year, they scored 80 against UC Irvine in a game where I took UC Irvine to beat them. And that's the lone time they scored 80 points all year. They scored more than 70 points in just 2 other games. They lost to Pacific 76-72, and they beat New Mexico 71-67 a couple weeks ago. But their point totals the rest of the year, 69 against Fresno Pacific, 54, 60, 52, 57, 59, 65, 53, 56, 58, 54, 57, 64, and 48. I'm not saying that this game is going to be a trucking. Or Fresno State's defense will keep them in the game against UNLV. But UNLV is a tough team defensively, too. And the difference is UNLV can actually score points. I look for Kevin Kruger's team to force turnovers. They're second in the nation in turnover percentage at 27.8% of opposing possessions. They like to run. Fresno State doesn't, which makes those turnovers even more valuable if you're the Rebels, because if you play at Fresno State's pace but you still turn them over at your regular clip, it makes it that much tougher for the Bulldogs to hang in a game. I don't know if Fresno's this year's IUPUI. I mean, IUPUI's numbers are still terrible. But, IUPUI has hit the 70-point mark, more times than Fresno State. So there's that. Speaking of which, they played Detroit Mercy today. We'll see how that works out for the Jaguars. With that said, we move on to the shot in the dark, and you're to blame. The Hawks over the Hornets. I know the Hawks played last night. They also hung 139 points last night. You know what else is good? They're playing Charlotte. You talk about a team that can't play defense. Beat the Charlotte Hornets. Hornets 28th in scoring defense, 118.9 points a game. LaMelo Ball is doubtful. Cody Martin is doubtful. Oubre is hurt. He won't play. The Hornets 26th in field goal percentage defense. They're 24th in three-pointers allowed. They're 20th in three-point defense. They're third worst in rebounds given up. They give up the most assists per game in the league. They're last in blocks per game. Other than that, they're great defensively. I know that Atlanta's playing the second game of back-to-back, but they've won 5 straight, and Charlotte is terrible. There's no sugarcoating it. Charlotte is terrible. And without Ball and without Oubre, they say Hayward's going to play, but he hasn't been good this season anyway. He's only played 21 games. That leaves you Scary Terry, Rozier, and a bunch of other guys that don't really move the needle. Is anybody intimidated by P.J. Washington? Are you worried that Mason Plumlee is going to beat you? No. I mean, let's face it. This is a bad Hornets team, and Steve Clifford's like, why the hell did I come back here to coach? I mean, he coached there for a season, or for 5 seasons. I'm sorry. He got into the playoffs a couple times. Then he went to Orlando, and it was not good. And now he's back in Charlotte. It's like, why did I come back? It's a terrible basketball team. I think that the Hawks will win that one easily. I'm going to take the Kings with the points. I know they're playing the second game of back-to-back, but I don't know if Philadelphia wants to play at the pace that Sacramento likes. And, Sacramento does a good job of dictating things, especially on their own floor. The Kings 6th in the nation, or 6th in the league, in tempo. Philadelphia 24th. And the 76ers, I mean, they're 12-9 on the road, which is better than they've been in recent years. But going to Sacramento has been a challenge for teams this year. The Kings, I got to give the Kings a lot of credit. You're used to writing them off by Christmas, and now all of a sudden, they're playing good basketball. Would I tease up the Jags and the Giants? I mean, it doesn't hurt. Give yourself more of a cushion. Because, you could tease what? A lot of people tease, 6 points? So you could tease it up to, 15.5 for the Giants? And it would be, 13.5 for the Giants. It would be, 15 for Jacksonville? And I get everybody's a fan of Kansas City in that game, but look what happened last week with the Chargers. Look what happened last week with the Giants. Look what happened last week with Miami sticking in the game. All it takes is a bounce or two in the wrong direction, and that things change in a hurry. I would tease Jacksonville up. Is there a possibility that Kansas City will win 41-7? Sure. But Kansas City doesn't tend to beat the number when it comes to playing this season. You look at their number against the line, and it wasn't inspiring. I mean, sure, they blew out the Raiders in Week 18, which was all well and good, but they were 5-11-1 against the number. And that win, they had 2 wins against the number in the last 3 weeks of the season, and they came against Seattle on Christmas Eve and the Raiders. But, they didn't cover either game against Denver. They didn't cover against Houston. They didn't cover against the Rams. They didn't cover against the Chargers. They pushed the game with Jacksonville in the first meeting because the line was 10. They didn't cover against a Tennessee team that was playing Malik Willis at quarterback. I think that Jacksonville will hang around and cover the line. But if you tease it up, it gives you even more of a cushion to work with. Same with the Giants. I don't know what Eagles team you're going to see. You're going to see the team that hung 48 points on the Giants in mid-December, or you're going to see the team that struggled to beat the backups. Chiefs in the first half. Hold on, let me pull up the number. First half, -6.5. Yeah, there's some viability to that. I mean, like you said, Kansas City's a good offensive team early, and then they kind of slack off in the second half, and that's why games get close. So yeah, that's a viable option as well. Brian says he's got a ticket on the Jags plus 10.5. I think that's probably a good ticket because I could see this being a game that ends up, no matter what the score looks like at halftime, it could end up a one-score game. Let's face it. We're looking at a Kansas City team that wasn't good at making plays defensively in the second half of games. Otherwise, you don't end up in overtime against Houston. You don't end up in overtime against Tennessee. You don't end up in games where Denver could beat you twice in the fourth quarter. Now, sure, they won all those games. I give them credit for that. But this is also a team that lost to the Colts. It's also a team that lost to Buffalo. This is a team that lost to Cincinnati because they didn't make plays down the stretch. And if you don't make plays down the stretch in games, you're going to get burned. Just a fun stat for you. Kansas City gave up the most passing touchdowns in the league this year, 33. They only picked off 11 passes. You're dealing with Trevor Lawrence, who, he looks about as bad as Nathan Peterman in the first half of that game against the Chargers last week. But you know what? They came back and won that football game. Sure, some of it was the fact that the Chargers couldn't game plan offensively for shit because they wouldn't run the ball. And if you don't run the ball, you're not going to win games when you've got a lead and you're just trying to kill clock. Andy Reid won't let that happen. But Andy Reid doesn't want to have to turn around and hand the ball off because it takes the ball away from his most explosive player, and that's Mahomes. Jacksonville's going to hang around in this game. And I know that's the last thing anybody that's a Chiefs fan wants to hear, but Jacksonville will hang around. Jacksonville will make it interesting. They may not win the game, but it'll be interesting. Winnipeg over Ottawa. I don't trust the Ottawa Senators. Can you? Sure, if you want. Would you want to? You'd have to answer that yourself, but I don't like Ottawa. They're a team that's bad. They're playing the second game of back-to-back, too. They lost to Pittsburgh last night. Now they have to play the Jets. The Jets are mad after they were beaten by Toronto on Thursday night in a game where they fired about 300 shots on goal and scored one. I like Hellebuyck better than I like anybody in net for Ottawa. The Senators trying to stay ahead of Montreal for the basement, to stay out of the basement in the Atlantic. I'll take the Jets. Tampa Bay over Calgary. You talk about another team that's gone nowhere with any kind of consistency, and it's the Calgary Flames. They've dropped a couple in a row. They're just 21-16-9 on the season. Tampa Bay, they're coming off a loss in their last game as they fell to, of all teams that you would lose to, they lost to Edmonton. Snapped a 5-game win streak. I don't trust the Flames. I'll take Tampa. Team been there, done that. Daniel Jones over 42.5 rushing yards. Look at what he did last week. Yeah, Charleston did struggle with Monmouth the other day. I think that was a matter of Monmouth was, 1-17 or something like that. So it was disappointing. Line's a lot lower for this one. I think it's 8.5 or 8 or something like that. Northeastern's a decent team normally. Bill Cohen's still there coaching. They're coming off back-to-back wins. They beat Delaware by 1. They beat Stony Brook on the road Thursday night. The problem is, Northeastern beats themselves. They're 338th in turnover percentage. offensively. They're 348th in turnover percentage on defense, and they don't shoot free throws well. Meanwhile, Pat Kelsey's done a real good job with that Charleston team, longest active win streak in the nation. It may not be pretty, but I think that I think they'll win today and cover the number. Yeah, I agree with you though. That Monmouth game was it was a bit of an eye opener because I don't think anybody expected Monmouth to play that well, but they played up to the level of competition as opposed to playing down to it. They play Hampton today. They're actually a slight favorite to win that game over Hampton. It's the only game they're slated currently to win the rest of the year, according to Ken Palm. But yeah, King Rice, I feel bad for him because his team won 21 games a year ago, and then they switched conferences, and it just hasn't gone well for the Hawks. They don't have some of the players they had from before. Walker Miller's gone. Reynolds is gone. They were a senior-laden team last year, but these guys they have now are taking time to get acclimated, and you really can't do that at this level. Hey, Skill, good to see you. Hope things are going well with you. Like I said, Jones should run the ball. We saw him run the ball well in the last meeting, and we've seen him break off big runs against this Eagles defense. Everybody remembers the 80-yard run where he was tripped by the 9-yard line and fell down. And in the first meeting with the Eagles, because he didn't play in the second one, he only had 26 yards on the ground, but he only ran the ball 4 times. You look in the last couple of games of the season that he played, 10 carries against Washington. He had 11 against the Colts for 91 yards. 17 carries last week for 78 yards against the Vikings. I think they found something that they like, and they can utilize that to their advantage. I think he'll end up with 45, 50 yards on the ground. Cornell over Harvard. I really like Cornell's team. They play good basketball. Brian Earl's got a high-octane offense up there in Ithaca. They hung 102 on Columbia earlier this week. They beat Yale last week by hanging 94 points. Harvard, I like Tommy Amaker, but they just lost to Dartmouth. They're 11-8. They're 2-3 in the Ivy League. They don't shoot well from 3. They turn the ball over. Harvard's going to have to grind the clock in this one, and I just don't see Brian Earl's team letting them do it. Thoughts on Xavier and Detroit versus IUPUI? I like Antoine Davis. Does that count for Detroit Mercy? Let me see what the line is because I haven't looked at it yet this afternoon or this morning. College basketball. There we go. Let's see. Detroit's now favored by 13. Huh. Wow, they knocked the total down on that one. It was 147, now it's 142. Apparently they don't have any faith in IUPUI scoring any points. The fun part is Detroit doesn't play defense. So you're dealing with a battle of 2 teams that don't play defense. IUPUI's been semi-decent at home if you want to count, losses as being decent. They lost in overtime to Oakland the other day. I just don't think, just looking at IUPUI's numbers, and they're still bad. I don't know if they can stop Antoine Davis. He's knocked down 83s, shooting better than 40% from 3-point range this year. I think IUPUI will battle for a while, but I think Detroit will pull away down the stretch and cover. I think it should end up over that number. I had it projected around 150 or so. I think that Detroit will cover and go over as far as Xavier. Didn't somebody get burned on Xavier the other day? Was that you, Bronco, that got burned by Xavier against DePaul? Georgetown getting a boatload of points. When doesn't Georgetown get a boatload of points? Here's the thing with Georgetown. They don't look like a good basketball team. I know they hung tough against Villanova Monday night. But this is a down year, I think, for Villanova. I'm just looking at what Georgetown's done on the road. I mean, they lost by 18 to Loyola Marymount on a neutral floor. They lost to American at home, lost to Texas Tech, lost by 19 to Syracuse, lost by 11 to UConn, lost to DePaul by 7, lost to Marquette by 22, lost to Villanova by 4. How big is this boatload of points now? It was, 17? I don't know if 17 points is enough. I mean, you're talking about a Xavier team that's going to be pissed off that they lost to DePaul because they had won, 11 in a row before that. And they had beaten UConn and Creighton and Marquette in short order. They beat Georgetown by 13 in the first meeting at Georgetown and hung 102 on them. I don't know if 17 points is enough for the Hoyas going on the road. I mean, they barely stayed within that parameter at home. I would lean towards Xavier. Oh, Joaquin got burnt by Xavier also. Okay. I know I saw on the Discord, and I don't know if you guys have signed up and gotten in the Discord. I know I've seen some of you guys in there. But get in there. A lot of good stuff going on in there. And Miami getting the 6 against Duke. I wrote that game, and I think I leaned Duke, but the line wasn't out when I put the game up. I think Miami could hang tough. I mean, they played some pretty good basketball this year. And Duke is getting by on defense because their offense is not that good. Outside of Filipowski, Jeremy Roach is inconsistent. And everybody else is falling off a cliff because they don't have anybody that puts up any big numbers. Mark Mitchell started strong. He's kind of faded out. With 6 points, I would probably take Miami because I think they can hang tough enough with their offense with Wong and Omeyer and Nigel Pack. They can make it interesting, and I think they can hang in there. They might not win the game outright, but I think they can keep it in that 3 to 5 point range and give themselves a shot late. George Washington over Dayton. I know everybody's like, why the hell would anybody want to talk about George Washington? Well, A, they're getting points. B, they just beat George Mason on the road. They also want to win over UMass. They also beat Loyola of Chicago. On top of that, they lost to a pretty decent Washington State team by 2. They routed South Carolina earlier this year. They hung tough against Hofstra. This is not the George Washington teams we're used to seeing. And Dayton, you talk about a team that is bad when it comes to putting points on the board. Meet the Dayton Flyers. I know they've won 8 of 9 or something like that, but they still don't score a lot. I mean, they've hung a couple of hefty point totals in that stretch, but beating Alcorn State doesn't really move the needle. They got by Davidson the other day, didn't cover. They'll probably win this one. I don't see them covering. I think George Washington with the points is the way to go. Charleston, like we said, over Northeastern. And Mahomes over 2.5 passing touchdowns, let's face it. The Chiefs don't score rushing touchdowns. Why would they do something so pedestrian? Auburn, also UNC, Greensboro, and Eastern Washington. Trying to do these quick here. Auburn. They're playing South Carolina. That's pretty self-explanatory. South Carolina is terrible. We watched them get destroyed by Texas A&M a couple weeks ago. Doesn't matter where they're playing. Line's 13. You look at South Carolina's numbers of late, and they are not pretty. Here's their last 5. Lost in overtime at Vanderbilt, lost by 43 at home to Tennessee, beat Kentucky at the Rupp Arena, lost by 41 at home to Texas A&M, lost by 12 to Ole Miss. Auburn should win this one by at least 15 to 17 points. South Carolina can't shoot. And if Bruce Pearl's team plays tempo like anywhere close to what they like to do, they play way faster than the Gamecocks do. That one should go Auburn's way pretty easily. UNC Greensboro. Let me take a look here. UNC Greensboro against Mercer. Oh, the Mercer Bears. Where have you gone, Mercer Bears? Let's see. Greensboro's favored by 8. Let's see. Greensboro's won 3 straight, 6 of 7. They beat Wofford on the road. They beat Western Carolina on the road. They beat Chattanooga rather convincingly. I expected better than that from the Mocs. But the Mocs have struggled at times this season. They beat VMI. They beat Furman on the road. Furman, a very good basketball team that doesn't get a lot of credit. They're probably the best team down here in the Palmetto State, no matter, even though people will tell you that Clemson is a good basketball team. Furman beat Mercer by 18 points last week, and we just watched Greensboro beat Furman at Furman by 8. Mercer, let's see. Let's see if I can find any redeeming qualities about Mercer. I can't. They're bad defensively. They're slow, tempo-paced. They don't turn the ball over a lot, but they don't shoot it that well either. I would take Greensboro. I could see them covering. It's only an 8-point line. They'll probably win by 10. Eastern Washington takes on Northern Arizona. The good old Lumberjacks. Let's see, what do we have on them? Northern Arizona trending the wrong way fast. Lost 4 straight, 8 of 9. Lost to Idaho Thursday night by 5 at home. Before that, they lost to Sacramento State, Portland State, and Montana State. Meanwhile, Eastern Washington, David Riley's got his team going in the right direction. 9 straight wins, including wins over Montana and Montana State on the road. They just beat Northern Colorado on the road. They're 7-0 in the Big Sky. Let's see. What do we have on the line on this one? Northern Arizona, Eastern Washington. Northern Arizona. There we go. Where the hell did it go? 4.5. Let's see. Eastern Washington 30th in effective field goal percentage, 19th in 2-point shooting. They're good at the free throw line. Northern Arizona 297th in effective field goal percentage, 347th in effective field goal percentage defense, 341st in 3-point defense, 326th in 2-point defense. They're apparently foul happy too. 347th by giving up a free throw about every 2.5 field goal attempts. So that's probably how they end up losing games. Is because they run out of they keep putting guys on the line. It's going to be close. I think, playing at home works for Northern Arizona, but I don't know if they can hang close enough because, like I said, they like to foul. They might put Eastern Washington on the line late to help them salt it away. I'd probably lead Eastern Washington minus 4.5. They'll probably win by 6 or 7, but I don't think it'll end up. It's not going to be a blowout. Let's put it that way. So hopefully we covered everything. Hopefully you guys have a good rest of the weekend. Enjoy the games today, whether you're watching the NFL or one or more of the 144 college basketball games on the slate, or the NHL or the NBA, or if you're watching tiddlywinks or backgammon or soccer or croquet, badminton, if you're going to watch the UFC later, whatever you do, enjoy it. John, this promo code, we change them weekly, so this one is good until at least Monday. Every Saturday, I'll put out a new one. I'll also start putting out tweets about it in case anybody wants to follow me on Twitter. The handle's right there at Betting Royalty. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me there, and I will do my best to get back to you in a timely fashion. Thanks for being here, though. Thanks for being so interactive. Thanks for throwing out questions and comments and being part of the show. I know sometimes it's tough to be fully functional at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. I'm not used to being awake necessarily. But thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of the show. I'm glad you're here. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your neighbors' friends, tell your friends' neighbors. If you haven't jumped in on the premiums, like I said, promo code right there, 60% off. Can't go wrong with that. And we will see you next Saturday at 9 a.m. for another exciting edition of Just Parlays. I'm Chris King. So long, everybody.